Right. So this is what generally architectural governance framework is, because in the previous session we discussed about, of course, previous to previous, we discussed about a EA part, even solution architect principles, why solution architecture is required. Followed by this, what are the different models we use when we are implementing solution architecture? I think in the last session we discussed about 4Cs model, right? So context, right? So context diagram, right? So all these things we have discussed in the previous session. Now, today we are going to discuss about architectural governance framework. So before I'm getting into architectural governance framework, let me give you a clarity as far as the role of a solution architect itself is concerned, because solution architect or enterprise solution architect, because if we are providing solutions for the whole enterprise, we call it as enterprise solution architect. Or else if you are confining only for a particular application, we call it a solution architect. End of the day, the roles irrespective of it. Generally, there are different frameworks we use, because in the beginning of the sessions, when we have started about solution architect, I told you there are two frameworks which normally we follow, right? So because whenever in a part of providing a technical roadmap to the team in context to the solution part, there are two different frameworks we use. One is uh, TOGAF framework and second was Jackman, right? So these are the two architectural frameworks. Enterprise level architectural frameworks is what we have to be used with. So whenever we try to understand about the architectural governance, this architectural governance process is not something different from enterprise to solution, because end of the day, even though we want to provide solutions for any customer requirements, end of the day, understanding over the enterprise is always required, because this part I have discussed a couple of times with you, right? So now when it comes to the organization level understanding over enterprise governance and all that, generally this is the one which majorly trying to understand about the procedure as well as the policies. What is that are we going to implement when we are developing the architecture part? Because any architecture, either it can be business level scenario we understand, or else it can be an application level scenario, or it can be an infrastructure or system level scenario or data level scenario. Understanding over the governance process is required. So governance process, nothing but an administrative procedure. So followed by the kind of policies, procedures, standards, whatever is required for us to implement the application. I'll give you an example to you. Let's say, for example, we are developing a solution to one of our customer who is from the healthcare segment or some XYZ domains. Organization sometimes, as an example, I'm giving this, right? So organization sometimes, some organizations may fall under CMM level standards, right? So Six Sigma standards, all that, right? So CMM level company, right? So means whatever the standards, procedures they follow in their organization is completely relating to the CMM level things, right? From the process of the business, what they were running, at the same time, the kind of systems and applications, whatever they were using, at the same time, how they are maintaining the data, everything is something falls under the standards. Even right from the recruitment, everything or falls under CMM level standards or Six Sigma, right? So that's what it was. Now, whenever we try to understand about solutions for any customer needs and customer requirements and all, it's always understand from the level of enterprise itself, because solution is a part of integral part of enterprises. So when we are trying to understand about the solution from the enterprise level context, it's always important for us to know about architectural governance. Normally, this architectural governance not only relating to the operational process of a particular business activity, Because usually architectural, when we talk about governance process and all, we usually think from the operational process only. But it's not only about the operational process, even we have to understand this from the context of the technology as well. So whenever we try to understand about the governance structure, at the same time, the kind of hierarchical process of the governance structure and all everything, when we're trying to understand this, usually this we have to divide and we have to understand this in 4 different levels. So if you want, you can write a note. Otherwise, I will write on here. Do you want you to write anything, Aishwarya, or do you want me to write here? Which one do you prefer?
Anything is fine. Anything is fine. You can
Right. So
write here also.
I'll write down here. You please carry on with the existing one, what we feel. Okay. Right. So this is what it
Okay.
was. Now, when we are talking about the hierarchy process of governance structure, as follows. Because this is common for any application, because there is nothing to do with any technology over here. Underline this point, right? So it is nothing to do with technology what we are implementing. Either it can be like either we may be using Java, or right, whatever the technologies we are working on. Either it can be a cloud applications, whatever it is, excuse me, whatever it is, governance structure, process, and all everything is something common for everyone, right? So end of the day, when we talk about the structure of the governance, will be categorized into 4 different areas. One is about corporate governance. The first one is called corporate governance. Second one is called technology governance. Third is called IT governance. Fourth is called architecture governance. Right? So these are the 4 different hierarchical process one should understand when we want to provide solution. So these are the 4 areas we have to be understood with. The first is about corporate governance. Second was technology governance, we call it as. Third one is called IT governance, followed by architectural governance. Now, what is meant by corporate governance? Corporate governance, nothing but the structure of the corporate. What is that are we working on, right? So the kind of scope of the business activity which an organization is performing, as well as the structure of the corporate hierarchical process, because whatever the responsibilities people are performing, this is completely depends on the kind of role what they were managing, right? So depends on the roles and all, their responsibilities and all, everything will be interlined with. Now, whenever we try to understand about the governance structure from the corporate level, it's always important for us to know about the hierarchical process of a corporate structure. So this is again varies, depends on the type of organization it belongs to, because sometimes because this is where the type of organization come into existence, because there will be some organizations which are manufacturing related, because normally services, if you see across industries, across the world, there are 2 things. One is manufacturing, second is services. These are the 2 level. Manufacturing means we are manufacturing a particular good, so that goods require some services on while we are managing it, right? So these are the 2 things: manufacturing, second is service segment. I can say segments. Okay. Now, when it comes to the manufacturing segment, the structure of the corporate governance will be something connected with different departments, because when you see the manufacturing segment or a manufacturing industry, performance of the manufacturing industry is completely depend on 2 things. One is about the production capacity what the manufacturing unit has, plus how much sales this organization is managing, because production capacity which is equivalent to sales capacity. So these two has to be balanced by the manufacturing organizations. So it is always important for us to understand about the structure of the organizations which are integrating with different departments within the enterprise when you have taken manufacturing sector into consideration. But when it comes to the service segment, right? Either it can be the software services, our organizations and all. If you see, service organizations were completely focusing on the customer requirements and the customer interest. This is where, if you see, the kind of applications we use from the application point of view, if you see, especially from the service sector's point of view, whichever the service sector, either it can be banking, right? It can be insurance. These are all the service sectors, right? So it can be healthcare, right? So these are the service areas. In the service areas, the major motto and the ultimate motto behind managing the services are to provide customer satisfaction. The reason why the kind of applications, whatever we normally work, especially from the service sectors, were CRM applications. You know that, right? So because CRM applications are the major major role plays when we are working on the service side. But whereas when it comes to the manufacturing side, more than CRM, the kind of applications, whatever we use to integrate all the departments to streamline the business processes of ERP applications. So if you see the closely from the manufacturing to service sector, if you see here, so manufacturing sectors are completely focused more on the ERP process, means integrating all the departments to make sure there shouldn't be any lag among all the departments while they are functioning one and another. But whereas when it comes to the when it comes to the service companies and all, they are more focused towards the enterprise customer related satisfaction, all that. So the reason why they use more of CRM applications on that. So when we are talking about the corporate governance, we need to understand the structure of the corporate roles and responsibilities, what an organization consists of. Again, it varies from the manufacturing to services. So how these are related or interconnected with these two. So this is all comes under corporate governance. Second, we talk about technology governance. Technology governance means how they are managing their technology. The example, as I told you, let's say if you have taken manufacturing sector into consideration, majority of the applications, whatever we use, are something comes under the enterprise point of view, right? So ERP applications are more used in the manufacturing sector because they have to integrate all the departments and they have to streamline the business activities, right? So because there should not be any loss of production capacity. Production capacity should not be down. At the same time, their what we call their sales should also be sustainable because whatever the requirement, demand and supply, right? So whatever is demand in the market, so the sales must be on such a way which must be equivalent to the production capacity. So when you are talking about the technology governance, what are the solutions are we going to provide? End of the day, it is completely depends on the kind of technology. What is that are we using for the particular industry it belongs to? Either it can be a manufacturing. As an example, I'm giving this to you because manufacturing and services mottos are some completely different. Because manufacturing is completely focusing on the quality of the product and what long-term deliverables are we going to provide out of this product is what the major role manufacturing industries see, quality output. But when it comes to the services and all everything, customer satisfaction will be the ultimate motto. Means whatever the queries been raised by the customer, that has to be resolved within no time. That's where generally they have to be focused. So when it comes to the technology governance more focused towards the kind of technologies which they were using, because sometimes these technology transformations is what we do, because in the previous also we discussed, right? So because there are different infrastructures which organizations manage, like legacy applications earlier. Now they are moving from legacy applications to the new applications. This is where they wants to migrate, or they want to, I don't say integrate, they want to migrate technology from legacy to the new side, right? So maybe cloud side or maybe any other way they want to transform. So this is where generally technology governance come into picture. Next is IT governance. IT governance means whatever the systems which they were using, right? So infrastructure, right? So technology and IT, or it can be infrastructure. It can be the kind of systems what they were using. All these things are comes under IT governance. At the same time, IT governance principles, right? So because if you remember ITIL and ITSM, two different things. One is service management, service infrastructure library, right? So IT governance process means when they are working on the business process of an activity, it's always important for us to understand about the governance structure and as well as the governance process of the organization. This is where generally IT governance come into picture for a particular organizations when we are trying to provide solutions for that. Next is about architectural governance. Now, when we're talking about the architectural governance, it majorly focusing on the kind of architecture. What is that? Are we imparting by considering the corporate technology and IT governance into consideration? Because corporate governance majorly focusing on the hierarchical process, technology focusing on the kind of technology as well as infrastructure which is using in the organization. At the same time, IT governance focused more on the kind of standards, policies, and procedures, what they are managing over a period of time. So these are the three major areas which we have to be focused whenever we are trying to understand architectural governance from the high level context. So being a solution architect, whenever we try to provide solutions for any customer requirements, all that, it is always important for us to understand about the architectural governance on a high level note. But when we try to understand about the governance structure as well as the kind of procedure, what is that we have to follow? There are some characteristics which governance process must require for us to maintain, right? So because these these characteristics which we have to be known with. So the characteristics of governance structure as follows. Let me write them here. Characteristics of governance. Right. So characteristics of governance are as the follows. The first one about the discipline. The first one was discipline. The second was transparency. The third one, independence. The fourth one is accountability. The fifth one is responsibility. And the sixth one, but not least, it's called fairness, right? So these are the characteristics of the governance structure or the process, whatever is to follow. Because if you want to understand about the governance structure itself is concerned, the governance structure characteristics will be falls under six areas, six characteristics we have to define. So one is about the discipline part. Second one about the transparency. The third one is called independence. Next one is called accountability. Next, fifth one is called responsibility, followed by the fairness. Now, when it comes to the discipline part, because as we are committed to implement different procedures, right? So processes at the same time structures to establish the organization. So whenever we try to understand about the governance structure, it is always the characteristics of a governance structure must be in a disciplined manner, where there are different implementations we were working on, because different implementations, either it can be procedures, it can be policies, all these things will be implemented by us on a high level note. So discipline is one kind of thing which we have to be known with. Next is about transparency, because when there is a hierarchical process in the organization, whenever we are implementing the structure of the governance, it's always important for us to have a transparency, because transparency will reduce the complexity of understanding, as well as effectiveness at work will be effectiveness of work will be more, complexity will come down if you are more transparent enough, right? So if there is any shortage in terms of the transparency, if you are not so great in terms of the transparency, it may leads to the complexity while we are performing the solutions, especially, or else to understand about the governance process as well as the standard. It increases the complexity of understanding the solution, which is possible and which is required for a customer. They want to use it in long run. This is where general transparency come into picture. Next, the third characteristics about independence, because roles and responsibilities, based upon the roles and responsibilities, whatever the activities these people has to be performed, must be independent enough, right? So there must be an independent mechanism where people have to work on their roles and responsibilities as independent. So there should not be any kind of dependency which must be connecting from one role to another role, is what it was, right? So this is where generally independence come into picture. Next one, accountability. Now, when we are talking about accountability and responsibility was interconnected. Let's say, for example, we have taken a task where if you are claiming that you are responsible, you held accountable. So at the same time, vice versa. If you are accountable means you will be responsible. So accountability and responsibility is also one of the characteristics which normally we see whenever we are working on the governance process as well as the governance structure. So not only accountability and responsibility, but it's also important for us to understand the importance of the fairness. Fairness means we want to be fair whenever we are trying to provide the decision making in the business organization level, because if there is no fairness in providing decision making, right? So for I don't use the word called partiality, but end of the day, fairness at the decision making is ultimately give you a positive result in the growth of the organization. Hence, whenever we are trying to understand about the governance process as a structure, so discipline is one of the character which must be good with. At the same time, transparency, independence, accountability, responsibility, followed by fairness. So these are the different characteristics which normally being we were into the solution architectural point of view, whenever we try to understand about architectural governance framework. So these are the characteristics which we must be good with, or which we must be familiar with. Now, if you can see this diagram, when you're trying to understand about the context of the architectural governance, as I told you. So the driving factors in reference to the architectural governance will be majorly focused on 5 different areas. The first area is about the industry part. You can see over here in the diagram itself, I am showing you, right? So for example, whenever you are working on, 1 minute. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So whenever you can see here, whenever you're trying to understand about the context of architectural governance from the context of understanding, so this falls majorly on few areas. So one is about industry, right? So which industry this belongs to, because sometime back, as I told you, right? So because there will be two different sectors will be there in across the world, you see, right? So one is about manufacturing, second is services, right? So these are two different things, because manufacturing always focusing on manufacturing a particular product. Services for that product, whatever we have produced, whatever we have sold or something. So for that, what quality services we are giving to the customer, post post sales or something, whatever it was, right? So post project implementation, whatever it is. So when we are trying to understand about architectural governance structure, the context is one is industry. We have to be focused on the industry, right? What kind of industry is this belongs to? That's we have to be known with. So not only industry, we need to know about the regulatory, because sometime back I've told you regulatory standards, policies, procedures, right? So whatever are we going to implement? All these things were also one of the key element which we have to be focused. So regulatory standards, policies and procedures are what we have to be considered. This is point number 2 from the context I'm talking about. The third one about political. Political means structure of the organization as well as the hierarchical process. From that context, I can say this because political is not something, is what I'm generalizing this statement, right? So political means the responsibility and accountability over the team, over the kind of roles which people were managing, right? So this is where generally political stands for from the context of it. Next one about legislative means legislative responsibility which people were taking in a hierarchical way, followed by the kind of legal compliance and standards which this organization consists of. So whenever we try to understand about architectural governance framework, especially from the conceptual structure point of view, because whatever you can see, the architectural governance framework, whatever you see here, this is a conceptual structure. This is not something connecting to the organization structure, because organization structure is different, conceptual structure is different. Because organization structure majorly focus on the hierarchical process, because it can be in a development perspective, right? So it can be an implementation perspective, it can be a deployment perspective, it can be a services perspective, right? So different hierarchical processes you can see, especially from the context of services. I'm saying this software services. Okay, I'm not giving an example from the manufacturing side because that's not relevant here. So organizational context of architectural governance is something different. But whereas before that, we need to understand about the conceptual structure, because conceptual structure and fundamental understanding over the organization, which is completely based on few areas, as I told you, right? One is about the type of industry we organization belongs to, the kind of regulatory standards, policies, and procedures, whatever we are maintaining, the kind of political hierarchical process, I can say political legislative. At the same time, the kind of legal regulations, standards, policies, and all everything are where we are going to take into consideration. So these are the different areas we have to be considered whenever we try to understand architectural governance from the conceptual point of view. This is not something relating to organizational point of view, conceptual point of view. These are the areas we have to be focused on. Now, when we are trying to understand this process flow, especially when we are managing this in the in the conceptual level, when we are trying to understand, so this is something majorly divided into two different areas. One is about the process, and second is about content. Process means how we are managing the activity in a particular aspect of the enterprise. This is where generally process come into picture. At the same time, content. Content means under what rules and regulations, under what standards and procedures this organization is running, right? So these are the two different things we have to understand. Now, when it comes to the process and all everything, this process majorly focusing on the policy management. You can relive it. You can, this is something relating to the framework principles part, right? So I'm not going into that. First is about policy management. Because if there is any policy we have framed in the organization, it is always important for us to manage the policies. Policy management is important because there is a policy which was initiated in the organization. It's all about policy which runs the organization, not people centric. Because you guys know, when we are working for organizations, it must be policy centric, it must be process centric, it should not be people centric, right? So because if it is people centric, emotions and all everything will impact on the decision making, which is not something good for the organizations. So organizations are completely bounded with the policies, procedures, and as well as the structure of the organization in long run. This is nothing to do with people centric, it is process centric. So how process is defined? Process is defined based on the policies, standards, and procedures of the organization, It's not only the standard of the organization, but as well as the kind of domain which they are coming from. Because either it can be from healthcare, it can be from banking, right? So it can be from services. Because if you have taken healthcare as an example, I'll tell you, right? So healthcare is the area. At the same time, healthcare is the area where we are directly connecting to the customer. Okay, one of the major areas, crucial areas, especially from the service point of view, is healthcare. Because in terms of the healthcare market, if you see, whoever the customers are, we providing services and all everything, were contacted us directly, and we are providing services to the customer directly. But whereas to an extent possible, whenever you see in financial market or insurance market, we are not directly dealing with the customer directly, right? So sometimes there may be, we deal directly, customer may not be appeared to us. But whereas in healthcare, it was not the case. Healthcare customers, the customers will directly involve with us, and we will be interacting with them directly. So when there are some standards and procedures we are managing, when they are creating any policies and all everything, this is completely depends on, sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it is depending on the kind of domain as well as the area where this industry is belongs to, right? So this is where generally policy management comes into picture. Next, compliance means compliance standards, policies and procedures. All these things will also be taken into consideration, right? So this is where generally this compliance standards and all everything will come into picture. Again, this compliance standards and all everything varies from organization to organization. All these things will be useful to you. Next, when it comes to the dispensation, this is not relevant. Dispensation and as well as this retirement, these two you can leave it, because these are all framework related stuff, which is not relevant here. In reference to solution architecture, it is not required. Next was assessment selection. So when you're trying to understand about the assessment selection, this is completely depend on two different areas. One is about the models and architectures we are using, because architectural models, this is where generally ADF framework we call it as, architectural development framework we call it as, that I'll discuss in coming time. So architectural development framework structure is there, that I'll discuss it later, model. Next, architectures means what kind of architectures are we working on? Either it can be business architecture, it can be application architecture, right? It can be systems architecture, all that. Next, technologies and products means what kind of technologies are we using in the organization? At the same time, what are the different products are we going to use here? So these are the two different areas where we will be focusing whenever we are working on the assessments and selections. Next, environment management. Environment management is not something I'm talking about